Now that we're done with the pricing section over here, let me go and show you actually how we can create a little bit more interesting over here, this header, right? You remember how we created a header, right? You can see over here, we had a header. So let me show you how we can create a little bit more interesting header. If you don't like it, this simple one, and more particular, I'm talking about this line over here, and we're going to use a font awesome to make it more interesting. But before we do that, let me just quickly show you what I actually take a look at. Maybe I have missed over in the last videos, right? That when I was preparing for this video, I missed it over here. We didn't have enough of padding, right? So what I did over here to this pricing section, right? Over here you can see that I wrote addition, right? We just added a padding top 20 pixels, right? Just to create a little bit more space. And over here I also added for the pricing panel, I just added a box shadow over here. So this is this box shadow that is created, right? So that was missing in the last video. And over here in the number section as well, right? We added just a little bit of padding over here in between this paragraph and in between these columns, right? So therefore within the column section over here, within the padding, you can see that we added a little bit more, right? Because before that, they were jammed all the way up to the paragraph. Now it's not a big deal. Let's say if you're missing this part of the, let's say, previous video or something, it's not gonna, you can probably figure out yourself. But just to be a little bit more constant with the things that we're doing, I just needed to let you know that we pretty much fixed it over here and how to fix it. Now let's go to our header, right? So we know that when we're working with index.html, right, the moment if we would want to create a new section, right, we know how to use a Bootstrap extension bracket snippets, right? We know that once we type over here generic section, right, this would be a Bootstrap generic section, right? So if I click it over here and we scroll all the way to the bottom, you can see that now we have our header, right? The thing is, if I want to create this header a little bit more interesting, what I'm going to do is over here, I'm going to get rid of this a div class header underline, and I'm going to write over here a HR, which is a horizontal line, and I'm going to give it a class over here like this, and I'm going to say the class is going to be font awesome over here, and I'm going to say underline over here like this. And since it is a tag that doesn't, since it is an element that doesn't require a closing tag, we can just leave it the way it is, right? And now you can see this horizontal tag, right? So we can just save this over here. And obviously we would need to go to a CSS, right? To make it a little bit more interesting. And what I want to do over here, remember when we had a section, right? Where was our header, right? It was, let me just find it somewhere. Where was it? I think it was in the services section, right? Over here, we had somewhere a header, right? So this is our header. And what I want to do over here that we maybe should have done originally, I just want to cut it and I'm going to paste it and put it all the way on the top where we have our body, which is going to be pretty much our general section, right? So over here, I'm just going to write a general rules over here. And this is going to be for a body right over here. And then we started a banner section, right? So over here, we're just going to paste it over here, this header, right? This is going to be our header section because this is going to be pretty much in our general rules section. Now, what I want to do over here is again scroll all the way to the bottom where we're dealing with this font awesome underline, right? And since it is a very actually very similar to our header, over here what I'm going to write is font awesome over here underline, right? And now I'm just writing a class name, right? And now you can see that we're selecting this class. But again, since it is so close to our header, I'm just going to copy these three things over here. I'm just going to say copy and we're going to paste it over here. And now we're saying, well, what is the difference, right? Well, right now we're going to start working on a difference, right? So if we go over here and we select this class again and we say font awesome over here, and I say underline over here like this, And then we go and we would need to start adding some CSS properties and values. And the first property that I want to show you is actually content, right? And over here, I actually forgot we need to use a pseudo class after, right? So now technically I'm going to be creating something that is not actually in my HTML, right? And that's why it's so interesting, right? And right now we're just selecting this this element like font awesome underline, right? And we're saying that after we want to create something after this element, right? So here, what I'm going to say that this is going to be a content, right? And I'm going to say that this content is going to be F, and let's say it's going to be 133. And I'm going to show you in a second where it is actually coming from, right? And another thing we will need to do is go over here, font family, and we will need to write over here within the quotation marks, font awesome, right? So again, we're going to be using a font awesome. You can see that I misspelled it, right? So it's awesome over here. Now you can see this little thing over here. This is actually font awesome that we placed after this HR underline, right? After this horizontal line that we created, we actually placed after this a font awesome icon over here. And where we can find this icon, right? So if we go over here to the font awesome, right? And if we go to CSS, and we're gonna go to a font awesome CSS. If we start scrolling down, right? Just keep scrolling. These are all the rules for the font awesome, which we can actually change, right? And here you can see, right? We have a before class, which would be a pseudo class that if we want to place before the horizontal line, right? Which we could have done it, right? It would be the same thing. But you can see over here, this is this content, right? It pretty much says what would be the number, right? So we used, right? Let's just check, right? We used 133, right? However, if we're working with a font awesome, we could have easily placed over here this 011, right? We could have placed 055, right? And again, this is right now they're saying before, right? And after that, there's going to be a pseudo class for after, but they're pretty much the same, right? There's not going to be a difference. What you're using over here, the most important thing is what we need to know is this content, right? This is what we would need to use, right? So if we go back to our main CSS, and I'm just going to close this CSS and this font awesome, right? If we go to our main CSS, again, another thing we need to remember, we need to include this font family, font awesome, right? Because even though you saw, even when I misspelled it, right, you can see that it's just a square over here. And it's kind of hard to see right now because it's so small, but it needs to be a font family, font awesome, and then everything is going to work correctly. Now let's start styling it, right? So I'm going to say over here, font size over here. And I'm going to say that the font size is going to be our usual 40 pixels, right? And you can see right away how big it became, right? And after that, we're going to say that this is going to have a color. And again, we're going to be using this orange color, right? So right away, we already know what is the color, right? We probably don't need to copy it anymore, right? We know that this is going to be the orange one, right? And after that, we're going to say that this is going to have a position, and position is going to be relative. Right, and let me show you why I want the position relative, because I actually want to move this thing, right? You can see that right now it's sitting kind of I don't know, like quarter in this line, right? So here I would want to say that this is going to have a position, so since it is relative, I can just move it, right? And over here I'm just going to write minus 10 pixels, right? And you can see pretty much how it right away moved in a middle, right, where I want it to be, right? And after that, we're going to write that this is going to have a background, because what I want to do is over here, I want to create a little bit, let's say a space in between this line, so it's not kind of going through, right? So here, I'm just going to say a background, and I'm going to say that for now, this background, let's say that we're going to say that this background is going to be white, right? So now you can see that how this line disappeared, right? And if we just add some padding, and if we say that, let's say that padding is going to be 0 top bottom, right? But let's say this is going to be something like 10 pixels, right? Something like this, right? So now you can see that how padding to the sides actually created this line, right? And now that we have added the padding, the last thing you can see, we would need to create some space, right? So we can go over here back to font awesome underline, right? And you can see that it's going to be exactly the same as header, right? And maybe over here, we're just going to write a comma that this is going to be a font awesome underline here like this. But what we were interested in, you can see that this is going to be a margin top. So we're going to say this is going to be like 20 pixels, right? And over here to the bottom, let's say that we're going to create something like 30 pixels, right? And you can see that how it actually looks much more better, right? It's a little bit more interesting the way it looks like, right? And what we were able to do over here is once we were going to be working in index, right? We can actually create this class, right? We can just save it over here in our section, right? In a section. And I'm going to create a new bracket snippets, which is going to be a font awesome class, right? So what I'm going to do over here, I'm just going to copy this one. We're going to go to a bracket snippets, right? And we're going to create a new snippet. We're going to say that this is going to be a generic. Also, we'll just say that this is going to be a generic, and we're going to say this is going to be a, let's say, font awesome, right? So maybe if a, right, like this, and we're going to write that this is going to be generic font awesome section over here like this. And we're going to say this is going to have a scope of HTML like this. And we're just going to copy this and copy and paste this, right? So over here, you can see that we have our font awesome, right? Underline, right? So whenever we're going to want to create, and from now on, probably we're going to use this section just to show you the difference, right? Over here in between this, our prices, and this is going to be our font awesome section, right? And over here, we can just click save. And now it is saved, right? So now we have generic FA and generic section, right? So if we go back and obviously delete this, right? And we just write generic, right? And now we have two options: Bootstrap generic section and generic font awesome section, right? So maybe in the description, we should have also included generic font awesome, right? And Bootstrap, but we're just going to stick at what we have, right? And you can see how to create this interesting header, right? Header section, which looks a little bit more custom, right? Now, two things I want to show you though is over here, when you're going to be working, remember that this is the way how you can change your icons, right? These are names, and if you want to go and select them somewhere, right, you know where to find them in Font Awesome. And remember that this background, once we're going to be changing the background as the section, it needs to actually match that background in order to have this over here, this line, right? And I'll show you in the next section once we start working how it is affected, because we will gonna have to over here have this rule. This rule is basically gonna change, right? It's not gonna all the time stay white because our background color is gonna be changing also. So now let's go ahead and actually let's create a one more services section, which is gonna look a little bit different.